Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and in this video, going to do a review of the Glenmorangie 14-year-old Quinta Ruban. I had a bottle of the 12-year-old that I bought probably back in 2016, 2017. That bottle is long gone, and it was very early in my whiskey career, and I really liked it. When I got to the bottom of the Lasanta, I had an original bottle or an older bottle of Lasanta. When I got down to about here with the Lasanta and the Quinta Ruban, I combined, the heels of the bottles. If you haven't done it, if you have the Quinta Ruban and you have the Lasanta, try combining them both. It was absolutely fantastic. I really liked it. In fact, try experimenting with home blending, particularly if you got like little heels and you think the two components will go together. It's a lot of fun and a real tasty treat. I really liked it. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about this bottle. The Glenmorangie Quinta Ruban 14-year-old Highland single malt Scotch whiskey was aged in American white oak. Now, Glenmorangie gets their bourbon cask from both Heaven Hill and Jack Daniels, but they're not specific as to which cask they use for what bottles, but you know where they're getting the bourbon cask from. It was then finished in ruby port pipes. It is non-chill filtered. It's bottled at 46% alcohol by volume, which is higher than the Lasanta, and in my neighborhood sells for about the same price as the Lasanta, which is about 60 bucks. So color-wise, you can see there's a slight tinge of like a pinkish color. So obvious sign that it's seen some time in a wine cask. There aren't a whole lot of distilleries that have port cask finishes in their core range or knock over the boxes. So it's one of the things I like about Glenmorangie is they have a port cask in their core range. Now, you can search around, and there are a lot of distilleries that do port finishes, but it's not a core range. It's like a one-off. It's a limited edition. It's a once-in-a-while, something like that, or a special edition bottle. But Glenmorangie, as far as I know, and I've searched around, is the only one who's doing a port cask in their core range. Now, tasted blind or smelled blind, a port cask can come across very similar to a Pedro Jimenez or PX cask. So 90% of the casks in Scotland are ex-bourbon casks, what's in the warehouses. The other 10% is made up of mostly fortified wine casks, and most of that is sherry cask, and most of that sherry cask is Oloroso sherry. So you have Fino, you have Amontillado, you have Oloroso, Palo Cantado, and Pedro Jimenez. So most of that sherry cask is Oloroso. Now, all those types of sherry are made with the Palomino grape, grown on Albariza soil. It's a white chalky soil in the Jerez Triangle. Pedro Jimenez is a completely different grape. It's a Pedro Jimenez grape, and it's not even grown in the same region yet. They call it sherry, and it's even produced in the same way. It's made from grapes put out on a straw mat that are dried. So it's made from desiccated grapes. It's really, I think, stylistically, Pedro Jimenez PX needs to be in a whole nother category. But they'll use PX in sherry. They can add it to a little bit of Oloroso to make it sweeter. Sometimes it's called Amoroso instead of just Oloroso. But anyway, that's Oloroso. That's sherry. A port cask and a PX cask can seem very similar on the nose, very similar on the palate, because they're both very sweet and very intense raisined grapes. But there are some subtle differences in a port cask. And if you're not accustomed to drinking port, I highly recommend trying it. Port, like sherry, you can open a bottle and it's good for weeks and weeks. You don't have to kill it right away. In fact, if you keep it cool enough, probably over a year. Now, I actually have a little port once a week. I don't drink full glasses, but at least once a week I have a little bit of port because I like port. So let me tell you a little bit about port. What is port wine in case you're not familiar with it? The name port is a protected designation of origin from Portugal. There are wines you can get from California and elsewhere that call themselves port, but legally they're not port, and most of the time they don't even use the traditional grapes used in making port wine. Now, there are different types of port. There is a ruby port, which are deeply colored red port wines, which include vintage port, late bottled vintage port, LBV, crushed port, ruby ports. Then there's tawny port, which are actually my favorite, which are sweet barrel-aged port with oxidative nut and caramel flavors. So they tend to get a little more almondy and those dried characteristics similar to an Oloroso sherry in terms of the oxidative character. Then there are white ports, which are made with indigenous white grapes, including Robagatto, Viosino, Goveo, and Malvasia. Don't trust me on those pronunciations. And then there's a rosé port, which is sort of new, which is made like a rosé wine with flavors of strawberry, violets, and caramel. Now, rosés, and I'm going to deep dive on wine here, rosés can be made in several different ways. There's something called a saignée, which is basically you take your red wine and you bleed off some of the juice and to use that to make a rosé. And what it does is it concentrates your red wine and then gives you juice, a pink colored wine for making a rosé. You can obviously take a red wine and a white wine and combine the two. That's how a rosé champagne is made. You're not allowed to make rosé wines like that anywhere else in France other than Champagne. The other is to do a minimal pressing on red grapes. So you're not bleeding and you're not combining. You just take red grapes and you give it a limited press so that you're only having a little bit limited skin contact, and that'll give you a rosé wine. My favorites tend to be the Saignée wines. There are said to be at least 52 grape varietals that can be used to make port. 13 are most common, and most of them begin with the word Touriga or Tinta. So we have the Touriga Franca, Touriga Nacional, Tinta Roriz, which is also known as Tempranillo in Spain, Tinta Barroca, and Tinto Cow. And those grapes actually make great table wines. There's a winery out in Lodi called St. George that makes table wines from these same grapes here in California. Port production is kind of interesting. The traditional port ferments in lagares, which are sort of like short swimming pools made of cement where people stomp grapes in them with their feet. However, most port wineries use automatic lagares with mechanical feet in place of manual labor. It's said that the human feet are perfect for making port wine because they don't squash it so hard, the grape so hard that you break the pit, or you don't break the seeds. If you break the seeds in a grape, it releases a lot of tannins that you don't want in a wine. But the foot, due to the softness of the foot and the shape of the foot, presses it just right so you're not breaking any seeds. So the mechanical lagares need to be just as gentle and soft and pressing on grapes for making port wines as do the human foots. All right, so enough about port wines. If you haven't tried port wines, check them out. I really, really like them. You can open them up, have a glass, very, very sweet, higher in alcohol, could be 20%. High alcohol table wines like Zinfandel can be 15 to 16. So you're looking 18 north for port wines. But I really, really like them. They're good, really good with chocolate, but they're not just for dessert. Actually, sometimes you get maybe a slight upset stomach. A little bit of port wine you could drink for medicinal purposes. So as I said, I have a little bit of port every week. All right, let's get into this whiskey. As I said before, has a slight reddish pinkish tinge on the nose. Fruit, you get blue and blackberries, vanilla, a hint of spice, raisins. So the main thing I get on the nose, because you get raisins on Pedro Jimenez as well as Oloroso sherry cask, but it's that sort of blue and blackberry note that you get from port aged whiskeys that's a little bit different. But you really got to hone in your nose on this. You really got to be paying attention. And if you're accustomed to drinking port wines, then your nose will be attuned to that. There's a hint of nuttiness, but not as much as if this was probably aged in a tawny port. a little bit of strawberries, maybe overly ripe strawberries, hints of caramel, just a little bit of chocolate on the palate. One more. Mouth texture, I like the viscosity of this. I like the weight on it. It has a little bit of squishiness, you might say. It's sweet up front, dries towards the back. A lot of chocolate in the mid palate. So blueberry, blackberry, a little bit of strawberry, vanilla, almost like a vanilla cream. Chocolate, if you have chocolate and there's like a cherry inside the chocolate, when you bite into the chocolate, the cherry gushes through. Something similar like that. A little bit of saltiness and a little bit of chocolate. It has a medium to medium plus length finish. It's sweet all the way through. I would say this is going on really onto your dessert whiskeys, but I really, really, really like it. I tend not to be into the super big sweet wines, but I like this one. Finish is medium to medium plus length of finish. The main thing about this, and if you're doing a blind, is it doesn't have figs and dates the way a sherry cask would. It's also not the color, as I pointed out before. Sherry, if it's a sherry bourbon cask combination, it'll tend to be sort of a golden copper color. You're not going to get this reddish color as you would with a port cask finish. And it has the raisin character, it has a chocolate character, but it doesn't have the figs and the dates that a sherry cask does. So if you're preparing for blind tasting exams, that's how you're going to know a port cask. Now, as I said before, if you're tasting for exams and they're only going to put before you core range whiskeys, once you recognize that it's port, then you kind of go, hey, pretty clear as to what this one probably is. Now, there are a number of distilleries that tend to do a lot of wine cask finishes. Glenmorangie, for example. So, what do I think about this whiskey? If you're in the mood for something sweet, then this is going to fill the spot. If you're looking for something different than what's typically out there, what you typically only have, and all your sherry casks, mix up your availability with it. You got bourbon cask, sherry cask, bourbon cask, sherry cask, bourbon cask. Let's throw in something different, right? Bring in something different. Then this is a really nice addition to perhaps of your collection or your whiskey bar. What we got going on there? I like the mouthfeel. I like the finish. Transitions isn't huge. There's a major difference from the front and middle of the finish. I would say the main thing is it does dry maybe just a teensy-weensy bit on the finish, and I like that nice chocolate raisin. Chocolate covered raisin showing about 3/4 of the way back. Really like that. Well, what I give it as a score? I'll go solid 89 points, $60. I know just the way prices are going these days, I think it's one of the better values out there in terms of quality of the price, the quality of the whiskey and the quality price ratio. And I think a lot of whiskeys that could be comparable to this are going to head north of $100. All right, so that's it for this video. If you subscribe to this channel, I want to thank you very much. If you've not yet subscribed, but you like watching my videos, I would greatly appreciate it if you would subscribe, ring the bell to be notified for when I go live or post a new video. And until next time, Slanja. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and check out these other whiskey videos.